to the open side. Karim Bete. Lovely ball here to Samu, who's quick. Pete Samu looking for Karim Bete. Back to Samu. Oh, that is wonderful. That is wild. That is amazing from the Wallabies.
Hi there, and welcome to Pick and Drive Rugby. We are the People's Podcast, providing a platform for rugby lovers to come together and support the game that's played in heaven. I'm your host, Mitch. Join me this week is Lockie. We've got Ando joining us shortly from Bali for a brief chat around the Wallabies. It's a sad day in Australian rugby with the results that's happened this morning, Lockie. How are you feeling currently? How did you manage to get yourself up and about to record the podcast this evening?
Oh, hello. And I wish I was with Ando. I wish I was with Ando in Bali, going full Matt Giddo, deleting a couple of Mai Tais and deleting the memory of this morning's early wake up. Lots to unpack in this one, mate. I know it's going to be tough to chew through a bit of a autopsy of the Wallabies body after that, but it was a hard watch, mate. How are you holding up?
Yeah, look, it's a disappointing performance from the Wallabies this morning. It's a disappointing performance in just the whole approach to the World Cup. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to unpack. We've got a lot to kind of get off our chests. And I think the best thing is that we can do this together, that the three of us can just get through what was a pretty low day in Australian rugby. And it's probably the lowest day that we have had for a very long time. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves so far. Now, we do have our tipping comp that is currently chugging along in the background. So if you haven't joined it yet, you still have the chance to get involved. Now, the code is up on the screen if you are watching on YouTube. If not, you can just go to any of our social media platforms and links there. We're on the official Rugby World Cup website platform for tipping this year. So if you are on there, make sure you just search for Pick and Drive Rugby and we should come up. But for those players that are playing along at home, and well done to the following players who are currently leading our competition. So in first place, we have Kakadu on 290 points. We have Felix 9 coming in second on 259. And then Feed J03 in third place on 224. Now, I've only got 5 places up on the screen. Lockie, you weren't far off number 5 when I had a look before.
Oh, I think last time I checked in, we might have been in top 10. I've slipped because I keep tipping with my heart. I've slipped down to 14th. But I'll tell you what, Kakadu on 290 has opened up a serious lead on Felix and the rest of the gang. So, it's really a 2-horse race at this point through the pool stage. I'll see if they can pull that back over the next couple of weeks as well. But some huge results that we're going to get through.
We also got our fantasy comp running as well. So if you want to get involved in that, do go to our socials and get involved there. Some pretty big scores coming out this week from some players in particular. Now, before we do get any further, I do need to shout out 2 calls to action that we currently have. So we're calling for everyone to join our Discord server. This is a server we put together to discuss the best Australian rugby community going around. Now, we've got profiles on there for all of the games that are happening. We've got a community of a few hundred people who have come together. And in some ways, this morning for the Wallabies game was pretty disappointing. But the thing that got me through it was having the Discord server there and having people that we could chat through. We could bounce ideas off each other, and we could just enjoy the hurt together. So if you do want to be involved in that, do go to Discord and sign up. Do go to our social media platforms as well. We've got a link to that server there as well. And our last one is a call to action. Please consider giving us a donation or a one-off tip to help the podcast sort of push along in the background. We've had some big donations come in the past few weeks. So a massive shout out to the people that have put their money into the podcast. We really do appreciate that. And there's lots of things that we're working on in the background to kind of keep the lights on and keep things pushing on. And every little bit helps. So we do this for love, not money, but every cent that is contributed does help a great deal there as well. So thank you to all those legends that have contributed and do continue to contribute, because we do appreciate it. And we hope that it can continue to make the podcast as good as it is. I think that's about it for the intro. Look, I don't know if you can tell, Lockie, but I am trying to put off us having to talk about the Wallabies as much as possible. But I think we've gotten to that point where we just need to rip the Band-Aid off and get into it. What do you think?
It's not even ripping a band-aid off, it's ripping the stitches out. Let's just go.
Let's get into it. All right, let's go. Let's get Ando on board and let's dive into the Wallabies. All right, let's not put it off any further. The worst has happened. The Wallabies are officially out of the Rugby World Cup 2023.
Not officially. If Fiji lose and there's a few other permutations, technically we can still get in, but it's not going to happen. So yeah, we're out of the World Cup.
That's the eternal optimist there, Ando. So Ando is joining us from Bali, tuning in from his holiday over there. So well done for making the commitment and getting in. And I think if this was a Wallabies win, maybe we wouldn't see Ando on the pod, but he has to get in and just vent some frustration from what was the performance this morning. Now let's just dive straight into our thoughts and feelings. And I'll throw to you first, Ando, because you are strapped for time. What happened? How are you feeling? What are the emotions after the loss?
Mate, I was just devastated. The time difference here and a bunch of things had meant that I didn't get to watch it live. I woke up early, started watching the game, and then things were looking okay throughout the match, but then I got a bloody email from Rugby Australia with the heading saying something to the effect of Wallabies go down to Wales. And I was like, damn it. So I got the score ruined for me, and I was only up to about the 18th minute. And at that point of the game, it wasn't looking too bad. I mean, the opening play of the game, we'd given away a stupid penalty for Parecki not rolling away. And then in Wales's first attacking line out, it proved that you don't put an untried 10 with players he hasn't played inside and outside at an international must-win game, because they just carved straight through us. But man, it just went from not great to worse. And by about that line out in the 25th minute, you remember that one? That line out where like all the Australian line out just fell over or something like that. That one moment just made me go, oh my God, this is one of the worst events in Australian rugby in the last couple of decades, I think.
Now, the final score was 40-6 to Wales. Lockie, that is not a flattering scoreline at all. The one thing that we can, I guess, be proud of as Australians is that we didn't let Wales get a bonus point. They didn't get the 4 tries, but they looked close. The fact that we weren't able to cross the line at all, is that part of, does that add some frustration into this result?
I don't know if it's possible to add more frustration to the result. I think I would almost rather them score 4 tries and show that they actually outplayed us. But everything in the statistical breakdown, even the penalties conceded, wasn't actually that bad. Yes, we conceded 12, but they conceded 9. I mean, on paper, these teams statistically matched up, and we just lacked. We lacked in every department that can't be measured. To me, it looked like we ran out of gas, we gave up, and it's heartbreaking. And I said he's devastated, and I mirror that completely. I feel empty after that, and I don't really know where to turn. I think what we saw from Wales, and you've got to give them credit because they did play well. They played a really effective game plan, reliant on strong kick chase and excellent defence, including their rush defence led by 9. And they just totally outthought us. I mean, we got outthought last week against Fiji, and I thought that's the area that we could, and most notably, improve on. That's where we could make the most change, but we did it the other way. We regressed, and it's hard to see. I think it's almost worse losing 40 points to 6 when 6 penalties are kicked and a drop goal as well by Anscombe, because it's our own failings either side of the ruck, and we just got exposed in every single way. I've pretty few positives I think I can add to that one. So maybe sure they didn't get the 4 try bonus point. Maybe Fiji can still top the pool somehow, but I mean, it's tough read.
Ando, what are the emotions right now? Are you angry? Are you upset? Are you sad?
Yeah, You know, I've forgotten what movie this line comes from. Part of me wants to say it's from Taylor Swift, but it's like, I don't love you, I don't hate you anymore, I nothing you. That's actually the worst thing, is to nothing someone, because it shows that lack of emotional care. In this moment, I just nothing the state of rugby, because I'm just so over the fact that we have these bad decisions being made by people in positions of authority whose responsibility it is to steward the beautiful game that so many people in our country love. And yet, I mean, we were calling about the decision to bring in Eddie and get rid of Reddy, particularly at that time, as being a bad decision. And look where we are at now. And that's without even going into and talking through the potential Japan move after this World Cup, which has come out through the excellent reporting from Tommy Decent as well. So, I mean, there's so much to break down, but yeah, I kind of nothing rugby at the moment. That's why I put that post out on Twitter being like, 3 podcast hosts needed, job going, just because I'm just so frustrated by the whole situation.
Lockie, do you kind of mirror those sentiments?
Yeah, I do. It's frustration that's not just surface level. It's, you know, in our skin, it's in our bones.
Yep.
I think, you know, everyone who's involved in this podcast and who listens to it, who's been on as a guest, who, you know, checks out the Twitter. I mean, we live and breathe it. We love it. And that number of people who feel that way just got fewer from this result alone. A lot of people talking about, you know, it's a battle for, you know, survival and the soul of rugby and that kind of thing. And if that's the case, we just lost, which is gut-wrenching. It's so hard to swallow. And I know that I'm going to be back, you know, in a couple of weeks, and we'll be pumping up the Wallaroos tires. We'll get behind the boys when they play Portugal. You know, there's still good rugby to come on the horizon and Super Rugby rolling around again before we know it. But I'd wager that there's a few people that won't take that journey with us. And that just sucks. Like, that really rips a hole in me. What about you, Mitch? You've been doing a lot of the talking. How do you feel about this one?
Look, I'm kind of surprised in myself in how I've felt since the result. And I got up at 5:00 this morning and tuned in live. And that first try that Wales scored, I was kind of just resigned, I think, from that point on. 3rd minute or whatever it was, they just sliced through our defense like it wasn't even there. Score barely a hand touched on the defender. And I just sort of thought, here we go. Like, this is it. We don't look good from this point. And then, as Ando mentioned before, the 25th minute, they just bottle that line out and just absolutely go to poop. And then they kick it long, and 50-22 or scrum, was it that
50-22. Yep.
Yeah, and so then all of a sudden we've gone from our best attacking structure of the game to defending on our own try line. And I thought, this is it. And then from that point on, the game just completely blew out of the Wallabies' hands. And I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I was kind of just resigned to the fact that this isn't a good Wallabies team. This isn't a good Wallabies performance. This isn't the best Australian team that we could be putting on the park right now. And I think now I'm getting a little bit emotional thinking about it, but I'm upset mostly for the players. And you could tell that from
100%.
The performance or the way that the players were reacting after the final whistle. They were upset, and it's not their fault. They've been put into this horrible situation and sort of been lambs to the slaughter. In preparation for the podcast today, I just started writing down questions. I think the only thing that comes out of this World Cup campaign, and definitely comes out of this game, is 3 pages nearly of questions that we need answered. We don't have answers for anything. We've just got questions. What was the game plan? Why did we have certain players selected? Why did we have certain players not selected? Just some of the way that the whole World Cup campaign went, with the injuries that were picked up along the way, the handling of those injuries, the handling of the news. We sit here now and we've got 1 game to go, but effectively our World Cup is over. There's no chance realistically of us getting out of the pool. And we look back on some of the decisions that were made, and it still doesn't make any sense. Why is Michael Hooper not there? Why is Quade Cooper not there? Why is Lenny Kitau not in the team? Why is a player like Parisi in the team that hasn't played a single minute at this World Cup? We just have so many questions, and I don't think we're going to get those answers, which is really frustrating.
Yep. It just speaks to some of the overall challenges and questions I think we're facing that we're just not really going to get. And a question that's been raised which hasn't received an answer is the questions to Eddie about his Japan interview. So he met with Japanese people from JRFU.
Supposedly.
Tommy Decent wouldn't put it out there if he didn't have solid evidence that it had happened. And Eddie has never denied that the meeting took place, but he said it was nothing. It was nothing.
Has Eddie agreed? Has Eddie acknowledged it? Because in the press conference when asked, he just said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He just outright denied it.
Yeah, so Phil Waugh had called him and spoken to him about it, just to check that there was nothing to the meeting. But it was implied that the meeting had actually happened. Now, the question is, if there was nothing to it, just say there was nothing to it. Just go, oh, yeah, look, I spent this much time working with the Japanese Rugby Association and we were all in the same place at the same time, so I caught up with them for dinner. If that's the case, then say it. Say there's nothing to it. But the silence from it is so difficult there. And it, like I said before, it just speaks to this broader issue of transparency in decision-making. You're pointing out particular players and decisions around particular players. Like if Max Jorgensen can come on the Wallabies the Wallabies World Cup squad carrying an injury, why can't Michael Hooper carry an injury?
Why can't Lenikitau?
Yeah, why can't he's available now? Why can't Lenikitau do it? And so there seems to be more at play there that's really hard to see, and just the stupid mind games that we get, and the stupid like foxing and shadow boxing with reporters is so frustrating. So just give us a straight answer, man. Like if you say that Lenikitau's injury was too severe to be worth gambling on, whereas Jorgensen's was a more run-of-the-mill injury, so it was a more concrete return-to-play process, and fine. Cool. Okay. That's not a problem. Just say it. It's just, it engenders this lack of trust within the Wallaby setup, and then that kind of transfers into other areas of the game as well. But that's enough for me for now.
Lockie, there are questions about the way that Eddie Jones has gone about the management of this World Cup. There are questions that are now being asked around the way forward. Now, we won't necessarily dive into all of those questions now. We won't necessarily talk about what happens next for the Wallabies. I think we'll wait until the World Cup finishes. We'll let it settle. We'll see what RA officially does say and what they do. And then we might do a deep dive into it in a few weeks' time when the timing's right and we all have some time to kind of really dig into it and put some time into it. But at the moment, what can the Wallabies do in the next week, in the next, I guess, few weeks? What can the Wallabies do from your mind that's going to, I don't know, turn things around slightly?
Oh, I mean, well, they've got to win.
Can they?
They're still over in France. It would be unconscionable to lose to Portugal. They need to absolutely demolish them to prove that they have A, belief in themselves, and B, can repay the faith put in them by coaches, staff, supporters, all stakeholders and people involved in Australian rugby. They owe it to us. They owe us a performance. And I don't think they would begrudge that or push back on that idea. We are owed a huge performance against Portugal. How that happens is up to them and whether the players and the staff involved in that can pull it together. What we're going to see, I think, over the next couple of weeks is a real shake-up, a real shaking of the tree. And I think the worst thing that could happen is that the Wallabies limp home against Portugal, come back and are allowed to be, the whole team, allowed to slip into anonymity. I think there needs to be some kind of review that's not internal. Clearly, Rugby Australia has had a few of those over the past years, and none of them have resulted in to what I see as meaningful change and progress. So we're in for a hell of a couple of weeks. On our front, I know that all the staff are gutted. everyone's hurting from the top down. I feel for especially members of the staff in the community teams and the officiating and coaching who absolutely bust their guts, whatever their role, to improve grassroots rugby in Australia. And it's a hard sell. It's a really hard sell when you send your top men's team off and they serve up that. So a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. And yeah, it's got to be a strong win against Portugal, prove that there's something left in the tank, and come home and lick your wounds.
Can I just jump in there,
yep.
Mitch?
Yep.
Just because it's really important that Lockie raised, which is the idea of an external review and one that's actually made public and that there's some level of accountability. Now, I'm not inherently saying that heads need to roll, but there does need to be a really full and transparent review process by which members of the public, supporters, people involved with the game at different levels can see a level of transparency and openness to acknowledge the issues that have been present within Australian rugby for a long period of time, and to then provide meaningful and well-considered steps forward for the game. And I mean, I just don't trust that that's going to happen right now, because what's Hamish McLennan's track record right now for Australian rugby? Okay, he got rid of Dave Rennie, which cost us about $500,000 in having to pay him out. He's brought in Eddie Jones at a really big cost for a 5-year deal that he may not see out the last 4 years of. Maybe he will, but there's some conjecture around that at the moment. The Wallabies under his tenure have now crashed out to the worst World Cup performance they ever had, in the worst defeat against Wales they'd ever experienced. They've got Joseph Suaalii for $1.5 million across a few seasons, but that doesn't start yet. And the women's game is in disrepute, and private equity or private investors have now pulled out of that process, or Rugby Australia has pulled out of that process because they're not getting enough money for the product. So what's he got to show for his time at the helm of RA? Like, literally nothing. And yet, if RA goes back and does another one of these internal, for our eyes only reports, that's going to be really, really difficult to stomach as a supporter of the game who loves the game and wants to have clarity around what the game is going to be doing moving forward to address the deep-seated problems. So sorry for that little rant there, but Lockie, you just mentioned that with the idea of the review process.
Now, looking forward, there's already talks around heads rolling. Is Eddie Jones the person to lead the Wallabies forward out of this dark spot? Ando, what are your thoughts around that?
Look, we've almost built the rod for our own backs here. You kind of have to back him at this point, because he's come in, he's absolutely torn up the template that Dave Rennie was working with and had built for the previous 3 years. And now he's changed the structure of the team. He's changed the assistant coach setup and entirely changed the playing group as well. So I think with that in mind, you kind of have to stick with him and just trust that he is still a good coach, who can execute on what he is promising. We have to trust in that, and trust is getting pretty hard to come by at these points.
Yeah, my biggest frustration when we look back is that no one in RA has actually challenged Eddie Jones, it feels like, to this point. That Eddie Jones has been handed the keys to the kingdom and he must have had one hell of a PowerPoint, let's admit it, when he addresses the board and says, all right, I'm not picking Hooper, I'm not picking Cooper, I'm not picking Ikitau. This is my World Cup squad. We're going to be the youngest group at the World Cup. We've got the easiest draw, but we're still going to win it. And that no one at RA said, actually, I don't think that's a smart idea. Why don't you have a backup fly half? Why don't you have a proven leader? Who's your captain? Okay, Will Skelton, that's fine. But Will Skelton captained the team in one game in this World Cup. He then picked up an injury. Obviously, that's not his... You can't decide that or pick that up in a preparation for a World Cup campaign. But on retrospect, the way that the whole leadership of this World Cup has been managed is a bit of a shambles. And it just felt like, looking back, Eddie Jones has blown everything up. He's blown up our structures. He's blown up our approach. He's blown up our leadership, our captain, our leadership team. and he hasn't. Ando's just telling us that he's got to head off. So, Ando, any last comments you wanted to say before Lockie and I keep going?
Mate, I hate myself for saying this, but there's always hope, isn't there? Like, I hate myself for saying that, but there's always hope. And I want it to be incredibly clear. In no way is any of what I'm saying about the people, particularly the players who are putting their effort in, day out to grow and improve the game. And you saw after the match how much it mattered to the players, that loss. So none of this is targeting any particular player. It's more of frustration with the overall direction of Rugby Australia and the broader organisational factors that come from the leadership within RA as well, which I'm finding really, really difficult to kind of deal with as a result of the situation that this loss puts us in. The good news is that if anybody remembers, I'm actually half Welsh. So I'm now Welsh. And I'm really happy for this 40-6 win. And on that note, I'm going to go, team. So I'm going to go give my mum a call and talk about all the good things that Welsh players have done over the last 24 hours. It's great.
Well, enjoy Bali, mate. Enjoy your holiday. We'll look forward to having you back on Australian soil, and we'll deep dive into some of the ramifications from this Wallabies loss in a few weeks. Go well.
Thanks, guys. See you, team. Bye.
Enjoy, mate.
All right, Lockie. Let's keep going. So, geez, where do we go to from here, though? It's not a good performance. It's not something that as an Australian rugby fan we can be proud of this result. And look, the glaring question that comes out to me when we review this game, and all World Cup, I was sitting at home watching the Wallabies performances and just waiting that Eddie Jones, it appeared, had a game plan or had something in mind. Well, that's the way he communicated, that he had some game plan. He had some plan or some way of doing things differently, but it was never evident on the field. The players looked lost. There never was any real change of direction, no change of leadership. No one ever changed things up. It just felt like we were consistently doing the same thing. Simple, boring rugby, one-up hit-ups, getting turned over at the breakdown, just not really competing in any facet of the game.
It's brutal. It's a brutal assessment, but it's undeniable. And I mentioned before, Mitch, when we look at the stat sheet, we had a similar stat line to the Welsh across, in the entire 80 minutes. Towards the end, obviously, the Welsh had their hands on the ball more. I think they finished up, with about 75% of possession in the last 10 minutes, which is understandable given their dominance. But, we're both in the 90s for carries. They had 4 line breaks. We had 3. We both turned over an insane amount of ball. We turned over 14 times, but they still coughed up 11 times. So, we're not perfect teams by any stretch of the imagination. The Welsh aren't that much better. But, what was missing, to my mind, aside from discipline, and that ties into this facet, is just direction. I mean, you mentioned the leadership, the experience. We looked rudderless. We looked like a raft tossed out in a storm and being totally blown around and overwhelmed. And I didn't see a leader on that field stand up and take control from the Australian side. Because a leader, and we've mentioned it before, I think a fully present leader takes that penalty shot to go 10-9 after 24 minutes and plays the long game. There was panic. That was a panic decision.
And it was such a frustrating decision that at that point in the game, when the scores are tight at that point, we're still in it. Yes, if we go to the line out and we score a try, it looks like a great decision, but we haven't been dominant in that area at all in this World Cup. Even against Georgia, we weren't looking dominant at the line out. So the decision to go to the line is really questionable. And as you said, the decision making in this game and the leadership group. Now, no disrespect to Dave Parecki, he's a great player and he's had a great last few years in Australian rugby since he's come back from Europe. But he doesn't scream Wallabies captain to mind. He doesn't do a whole lot in interviews. He doesn't give a whole lot to the media. He didn't seem to be revving the boys up and giving them the right messages of what they needed to do. As you said, there was players that looked really overawed and a little bit lost out there when Wales were consistently getting ahead of them on the scoreboard. Yet at no point was Dave Parecki sort of steadying the ship and giving them directions and saying, this is what we need to do moving forward. Why Eddie Jones didn't go back to take McDermott as captain is another question on my list. What's the go there? Like, you've named him Wallabies captain, 4 tests ago leading into the World Cup? He's the official vice captain. Yes, he got a HIA and he got a concussion, but he cleared that and he's back to play. Yet you stick with Parecki. I just don't get that at all.
I think we can look a lot further back rather than just the past couple of games to look at the captaincy model under Eddie. I mean, you go co-captaincy to start with, and then you're down to McDermott Alatoa first for the Bledisloe 1, if we remember when he was still kicking around before he dropped out, and then Tate, Skelton comes in, and then Parecki. And this is not a knock on any of these players. I must stress, and I know Ando stressed it before, I have nothing but respect for the players because we saw the effort, we saw the intent, but there is no substitute. There's no substitute for experience. And I don't understand why that hasn't been seen at a higher level. We touched on it before, but I mean, sending in brand new test captains to a World Cup. I mean, I feel for Dave Parecki. Why would you expect a captain in his second ever role in a must-win World Cup game? How can you be expected to deliver what someone with 70, 80 captaincy tests to their name can deliver, or someone who has that experience consistently at Super Rugby and a taste of test? It's just, I think the absence of leadership within the playing group, at least from an external perspective, has been so much of the downfall of this team, because we have not looked like a side that's been composed, and we have looked panicked in each of our 3 games in the World Cup. We look panicked against the French, and we don't look comfortable with the style of play that is being taught or is being conveyed. And a side that doesn't know itself is a side that's not going to win. Dig deep into your Sun Tzu art of war. The first enemy is yourself. First enemy you conquer is yourself. I mean, how the hell are we supposed to beat teams like Wales, who are a consistent Six Nations side under Gatland, regardless of what you make of the past year? How are you supposed to beat that time when they know their identity? I don't know what the Wallabies' identity is at the moment.
They don't know what the Wallabies' identity. I don't think there is an identity currently in this Wallabies team. They all look lost. There isn't a clear game plan. And if it is, it's very, very simple. But we're not executing it well. We're not even doing the basics right. The amount of unforced turnover ball, drop ball in this game was just inexcusable for the conditions and for this level of rugby. The other frustration I have, and this sits solely on Eddie Jones's shoulder, is just the management, the game management of the team. So he pulled James Slipper at halftime for Pone Faumasili. Now, at that point, we were getting parity with Wales in the scrum. And we know that Pone is an impact player and has the ability to come in like he did in Bled 2 in Dunedin. He had a fantastic game.
Yeah, blind.
Carried the ball really well, was breaking lines, breaking tackle busts left, right, and center. But he didn't have that impact off the bench, and our scrum went backwards. Now, in the lineup that Eddie Jones had picked for this team, James Slipper was our most capped player by nearly 50 points. Like, he doubled, tripled some players' test experience. So to take him off at halftime and bring on a player that's got less than 5 test caps, when we've already got a lack of leadership on the field, and we're down by, at that point, 10 points, is just mind-boggling.
I can't see a rationale. Maybe there is one. Maybe Eddie's got one. Maybe the staff have one. But you're right. Slipper didn't just have parity at scrum time. He had dominance in that first half. I remember at least 2 penalties that he was able to force from the tight head side. And he was looking really strong, which is also a huge credit to a bloke who's been pulled back into tight head for the first time in umpteenth years. It's fantastic to see. And, if there's one bright spark that's out of, this year of Australian rugby, it's the renaissance of James Slipper. I think it's been a great storyline to see him come this far. But, I mean, he's not the only player that we could look to that. I mean, why is Andrew Kellaway pulled? Why is Andrew Kellaway pulled? For Vunivalu. And Kellaway, who looked the most assured we've seen, in the past, in the whole World Cup campaign at fullback. He was, I thought he was really strong. He topped the run meters. He had some great involvement. There was the moment where he was caught. Was he caught out of position? Was that the chip kick try that Anscombe set up for Tompkins?
Yeah,
so he was caught out.
He shifted left and got into the line, and they was just kicked it straight over the top to the gap that he left.
So that's obviously a glaring error, but that wasn't his whole game. I don't think that can sum up his whole game.
And I don't think that's his fault either. I don't think that that's an instinctual decision. I think that that's a coach tactic. And we have seen it all year this year that Wallabies, particularly our back three, are defending out of position. The amount of times that Marika Koroibete pops up on Nwangani Tuasi's wing or vice versa, or pops up in the centres in defence, it just doesn't make any sense from a logical defensive pattern.
There's so much to unpack. I will try and highlight a couple of positives. I don't know how many there are. I thought in the face of immense pressure, I thought Tom Hooper actually had a decent game. He certainly made a lot of tackles, topped that count. He got his hands around the ball as much as he could. Bobby Valentini, you've got to give him credit for never stopping. The man has just been a workhorse all year and did so again. You saw those two in particular after halftime just shattered as well from work rate. Mate, outside of that, I haven't got a heap of positives. Ben Donaldson kicked 2 from 2. Yeah, Marky Mark had some good touches, but again, handling through the back line, some really inexcusable drops for a must-win quarterfinal. And where do we go? Where do we go from this? It's almost like therapy, this session. I'm very pleased. I'll sit on the couch afterwards. But where can we take this, Mitch? Is there a conclusion that we can find or a summary we can give for what was really, without any spin, a 34-point Rugby World Cup loss that kicked us out of the pool stage?
There's a glaring comment that Eddie made in the post-match interview. I think it was the interview that he did with Morgan Turinui, not the press conference.
Yep.
But he said, this has to be rock bottom. This has to be rock bottom for Australian rugby, or, well, let's hope that it's rock bottom, is what he's, something along those lines. I was like, how could it possibly get worse from here? If we go on to lose a Lions series 3-0, which is possible now, that's pretty bad, but the Lions are a pretty good team as well. I don't think it's worse than this. The only worse outcome would be if in 2027, in our own home World Cup, we don't even get out of the pools again. That would be lower than this. But apart from that, this has to be the lowest and the darkest day in Australian rugby on record.
Yeah, certainly in the professional era. I know there were some really dark days. You have to, look to the mind of someone far more experienced, like a Jim Tucker, to really get the sense of how bad things got back in the day. But yeah, look, successive pool game losses, it's never happened. Getting knocked out in the pool stage, never happened. I think you still got to give credit to Fiji and Wales. I'm hugely impressed with Fiji, obviously, and this Wales team now is in a position to make a decent run at what is a pretty good semi-final record for them. You got to remember they played, semi-final in 2011. They played semis in 2019. They're a good World Cup side. They punch above their weight consistently. And the way that they are framed in this draw is that they'll top their pool and they'll play probably Argentina or Samoa. More likely to be Argentina. And the way that the Argies have been playing in their past 2 games, I would absolutely bag Wales to kick 7 or 8 penalties, score the odd try, and put themselves into a semi-final. So credit to them. They've played tournament rugby and we haven't. And
credit to Wales too. They lost their key man, their captain, Dan Biggar, early in the game, 10th or so minute of the game. Played on for a little bit, but he went off, and that type of injury to the player of his experience can rattle teams and can change game plans. But Wales didn't look flustered by that at all, and they adapted and they kept pushing on and they kept applying pressure to the Wallabies. So credit to them.
Gareth Anscombe. Yeah, Anscombe came on and had a blinder, and we've got to remember Gareth Anscombe's a damn good player. He's only got 30, 40 caps for the Welsh, but he's a Kiwi product. I don't know if you've heard some of the rhetoric in the past, but he's the bloke that kept Bodie Barrett out of the under 20s side back as they were coming through the grade. Like, he's a very good footballer. And to be able to lean on someone like that to come off the bench and steer the game, that's exactly what the Wallabies missed. You can imagine the influence of a Quade Cooper or even a Bernard Foley, regardless of what you think of their skills on the park now.
Who was sitting in the stands watching.
Yeah, and the tweet as well afterwards. It didn't have to be this way. There's some really interesting commentary coming out. And I guess a final word, if I can, on some external commentary. How classy to hear from Michael Hooper getting behind the team, the coaching staff, and backing them to the hilt. When everyone else is piling on in the stand coverage, some of it, obviously justifiable. Hoops is there, the forgotten man left at home, backing all his teammates, backing Eddie, backing the staff. I don't think you can look at Michael Hooper and see a bad bloke or a bad leader. Maybe he's faded a bit in his rugby powers, but what he does for the game on and off the field and his presence and his poise, it's priceless. And we missed it. We really missed it.
We really, really did. And just even if we didn't see minutes from Hooper in this World Cup, having him in the setup and having him around the team for his experience, for his composure, would have done massive things for such a young squad. So I think we will look back on this and see that this was a missed opportunity, unfortunately, for this team. We should push on. We do have a fair bit more to cover in terms of what else happened for the World Cup this weekend. So what that means, though, is we will deep dive into this in a few weeks' time. So if you have certain areas you want us to focus on, if you've got certain questions you want answered, we will do our best to try and find who's best placed in Australian rugby to answer those questions and who's willing to come on and talk to us, obviously. But we will do a deep dive into this, and we'll go through everything that's happened and sort of have a look at what happens next. But let's leave that there, and let's get into some of the other results from some of the other pools this weekend. So Pool A is my pool. So we'll start with that one. And we had two pretty big games this weekend. So the first game on Thursday night, our time, was Italy versus Uruguay, 38-17 there to Italy. Now, that's a good win for Italy. Uruguay were not a bad team at all, and they pushed them all the way. Great to see some of the Italian players standing up and really delivering on some of the promise and the hype they've been building into this World Cup over the past few years. The biggest game of the pool, though, was the second game, which was on Friday morning, France against Namibia, 96-0 in that one. Now, that's a pretty big score anytime. But one of the biggest things and the bits of news that have come out of that game is that star player Antoine Dupont, their captain, did receive a fractured jaw from a high hit, and that has seen him out of at least the foreseeable future of the World Cup. We're not yet sure when he will be back, but they're hoping and they're saying at this point that he will be back hopefully before the final.
It's a massive blow. I don't think you can overstate how crucial Antoine Dupont is, not just as a player on the field, but as their leader and the player that galvanizes a nation behind him. He's got that level of celebrity now in France, especially off the back of their 2022 Grand Slam. So just the direction and the fluidity with which the French play without him is, worlds apart. You get Maxime Lucu, and yes, he's got a great relationship with Charles Lebert club level, but it's not the same. It's not the same, and you've already lost Ntamack. You've lost the prize pivot. Antoine Dupont will be back. We've sort of seen some reports come out that he's already had a metal plate inserted into his face to try and cover things up. He might go a bit Hannibal Lecter and get a creepy mask on in the next couple of weeks or so. So I don't think anything's going to stop him coming back if he can, but huge blow, and especially in a banana, skin game over the next couple of weeks. We've seen, you might not be impressed by Italy's first half, but their second half show that they can play. And There's no real rest for France because the quarterfinal is going to be against probably South Africa now that Ireland have beaten them. And I can't think of a worse quarterfinal matchup really. That's their reward for beating New Zealand and topping their pool, is a likely date with the Box, and that could be without DuPont. So, I mean, go figure. And again, the draw, that's its own unpacking podcast later in the piece. But yeah, huge challenges coming up for France despite the big score.
Well, the current placings for Pool A after 3 weeks of competition has France in first place on 13 points. Italy currently making it out of the pool in second place on 10 points. That isn't taking into account the fact that New Zealand did have their bye this weekend. So they've only played 2 games and they've got the one win there, 5 points to them in third place. Uruguay and Namibia yet to score a point on the table or get a victory yet. But yeah, expect big things from New Zealand when they're back and making their charge into the quarterfinals in the next few weeks. Moving across into Pool B, Lockie.
Oh, Pool B, I was very fortunate. I was very fortunate to have these 2 games before the Wallabies to sort of soothe and provide a bit of an early tonic because both these games were brilliant. I was really lucky. And starting off, the energy, the atmosphere at the Box v Ireland game was like nothing you've seen. And everyone was talking about the opening game, obviously New Zealand, France.
Before we get too much into the actual game and the rugby, what are your thoughts on the anthems? Now, there was a lot of talk around the first weekend of rugby that the anthems weren't that great with the children's choir. They've since rectified that issue and they've now got like a recording of someone singing the anthem. But it still doesn't sit right with me when you watch the anthems. There's like a 2 or 3 second delay between the players singing the anthem and what's blaring through the speakers.
Yeah, it's a funny one, and it's very French, to have things change haphazardly and leap all over the shop. But I feel like every time I hear the French anthem, it's perfect. So go figure. Maybe there's just a little bit more effort put it on their front. But yeah, we'll start with the Box Island game, and I touched on it quickly. The atmosphere was electric. The entire game, particularly the Irish fans, were just going berserk, singing their hearts out. From Ireland's call at the start all the way through, and those last 20 minutes where it became real. South Africa kept bungling opportunities to win this game, and the Irish belief grew and grew, and there was great footage at full time. Ireland getting up 13-8 of all the Irish fans singing Zombie by the Cranberries.
Yeah, I saw that.
Belting it out. It was just awesome. It was so good to see. But yeah, this was test match footy at its most brutal and beautiful. The 13-8 looks like a terrible scoreline, and then nothing happened, but it couldn't be further from the truth. They were just, 30 blokes beating the living daylights out of each other for more than 80 minutes, as it turned out. And there's a couple of points we can go through there. It's only 3-0. It's 3-0 to the Box after half an hour. That's the kind of attritional game this was. And then, Mac Hansen broke things open with a very, very late dive in front of the dead ball line.
I thought he ran it dead.
He was so close. I genuinely think he might have, but I don't think Ben O'Keefe
we don't
wanted to look at it too closely. And it's not the first time Ben O'Keefe came under scrutiny, actually, in this game. A lot of late calls that we'll touch on quickly. But at the end of the day, and I'd recommend that you go watch the mini, but it's the Box lost this one. It wasn't Ireland winning it. The Springboks threw this away. Whether it was their revolting white and teal away kit or the fact that
third kit that South Africa have worn in this World Cup.
And no collar. That's where the problem is. Lubbock missed 2 penalty shots in the final half hour. Faf de Klerk missed 2 penalties throughout the game as well. I think there may have been another one earlier in the piece. But the critical moment, Colby goes over and scores 53 minutes in, and Lubbock misses a sitter to convert and take the lead, to extend their lead to 10-7. Immediately, Ireland go back, win a scrum penalty. They get up 8-10. Lubbock misses again. Faf misses again. And on the 70-minute mark, after they've skewed those chances, they have a line out and they go full Australia and shank the throw. So you can't go back, and we will point to this final decision because it's a huge deal, but they had multiple opportunities to win this game, the Springboks, and they did not take them. So credit to Ireland. They made their kicks at the end, a sitter about 5 minutes from time, for Johnny Sexton to put them out to a try to win it, to that 13-8 buffer. But we've got to talk about the final play because it was huge.
The maul.
Rolling maul, box bomb squad in full swing. Immediately, Tide Burn, the Irish lock, is offside. Finlay Bealham is offside, swimming around the maul to collapse it. It's then illegally pulled down, and then the Irish trap it into the collapsed maul and play the halfback as he's got his hands on the ball, and Ben O'Keefe calls unplayable in time, ignoring what could be multiple penalties or a penalty try in any other game. So I'm glad I tipped the Irish. I'm very glad I backed them. So I'll keep that. But yeah, I think there's a reason for Box fans to feel a bit robbed. Next time, just make your kicks. Easy as that. And
I
really
think in defense of Ben O'Keefe and also the South Ireland in a way, I think when you read the rule book or the law book, you're meant to have 3 seconds from when a maul collapses to when you need to get the ball out, and it's called unplayable. He gave them nearly 6. So he was on one side watching it. He then went around the other side. And unfortunately for South Africa, it was when he went around the other side and he said, I can't see the ball. You can hear him on the audio saying, where is it? Where is it? That South Africa gets their hands on it. He's getting it out of the maul when he calls unplayable. So, yeah, you're right. There probably was a few Irish players offside, and it is suspect how it got collapsed. The fact that the TMO, though, didn't come in and say, we need to check this makes me think that maybe there isn't clear and obvious evidence that it was collapsed that way. But, as you said, you've got to take your kicks and you can't leave it to a roll of the dice on final whistle if you want to win a World Cup.
100%. And the Box have benefited from that multiple times. And I won't grudge the Irish for knocking them over because it's good to see. There's nothing worse than a Springboks fan getting too big-headed at a World Cup. So I'm glad to see them taken down just a small peg. But over in the Scotland-Tonga game, a blowout, really. I thought this was going to be closer. But the Scots really set the tone early. They looked like they'd crossed after just 2 minutes and then did so another 2 minutes later, got out to an early lead. A couple of cards from Tonga really proved costly. Ill discipline at the tackle. First Taumapea with a head-high shot, and then Vaifafita with a real cheap shot. It's got to be set on Finn Russell late in the piece to really cruel any chances. But, some great tries from Scotland. They had their bonus point before halftime, on the stroke of halftime, actually. And Finn Russell shows the value of a 10 with experience who can play. His passing game to unlocked the Tonga wide channels was beautiful through the first half. He had assists in at least 3 of the Scottish tries, and his goal kicking was a bit wobbly, but just out of general play, he remains probably the form 10 in the world at the moment. So 45-17 for Tonga. All the South African Scots scoring tries and doing well, which is good to see, and leaves Pool B in a pretty interesting position ahead of their final game coming up.
Yeah, so we've got in first place, we've got Ireland on 14 points with playing 3 of their games. We have South Africa also playing 3 games on 10 points, picking up that loss this week against Ireland. Scotland have played 2 games so far, and they're on 5 points with their win this week over Tonga and Romania following up the rear, still yet to get a point on the board.
Yeah,
all right, let's let's move into Pool C. So we've spent a fair bit of time talking about the Wallabies and Australia game, 40-6 there to Wales. Wales in Australia. I think I just said Wallabies, Australia. But the other game from the weekend and the first draw we have seen in the World Cup so far was Georgia and Portugal. Now, if there is a game for soccer fans to watch in this World Cup, I'd say put this one on, because this was a game of both teams not wanting to win it. Shots at goal in the last 5 or so minutes for both teams that ultimately lost it and resulted in a draw.
Well, this is heartbreaking. I felt for both sides. I mean, Georgia, it probably tipped as favourites ahead of this, even though Portugal had some good showings, and then got out to a pretty hot start, the Lelas. And then all of a sudden, Portugal have that game in control. And it's a last-gasp try to the Georgians to tie things up. Kicker has a shot, with maybe a minute remaining to put them ahead by 2. And then obviously the miss from the Portuguese kicker after full time from what was a pretty kickable position as well. So it looked, I mean, both teams looked like they just had a crushing loss, really. There was no emotion outside of abject disappointment and sadness from a draw. And I felt for both teams. Obviously, a couple of big games coming up for Portugal as well. They'll have Fiji, they'll have Australia too, and they'll have a point to prove as well with Georgians and the Fijians. So expecting a couple of big games coming out of those two teams. I certainly hope for our sake that both can maybe give a shake and keep our minute mathematical chance alive, but we'll have to wait and see.
So looking how things are currently shaping up on the table, we have Wales in first place on 14 points, getting all the wins of their games so far. Fiji currently in second place on 6 points. Now, they've played 2 games. They've only lost the one. We're also currently on 6 points. We've played 3 games, though, so they've got a game to play, a game in hand. We then have Georgia and Portugal both on 2 points now from that draw this week. So as things currently stand, there is a very mathematical chance that Australia could potentially get in should Fiji drop their next 2 games, even by a bonus point, but it doesn't look likely. Let's finish things off with Pool D.
Yeah, Pool D was a funny one. Our Pool D correspondent, Ando, currently away, but we can give a pretty brief overview because, as Pool D consistently proves, it's not worth spending a lot of time on. Quickly, the Argentinians, the return of the Boff, Emiliano, Buffelli was the mastermind in Argentina's must-win game against Samoa. Scored a crucial try, kicked the leather off the ball, and was a bit of a linchpin for them against Mana Samoa. Really upset for the Samoans that they couldn't jag a bonus point. Would have been massive in their campaign to try and get out of this pool, because now it's all or nothing when they face the English over the coming weeks. So big game in the context of their campaign and their aspirations. And really, Fiji were obviously, out of the 3 Pacific sides, tipped to be the best, but Samoa had a really good pool and a really good shot. So it's going to be a massive turnaround to see if they can get out of it. And the English against Chile. England, thank you for trying to prove me wrong, playing some expansive and running rugby. Big shout out to Henry Arundel. 5 tries, equaled Josh Lucy and Chris Latham, I think, for scoring 5 at a World Cup game, which is massive. And on World Cup debut as well. So I hope we see a lot more of him, just not against Australia going forward. I don't think anyone's particularly surprised it's a bonus point win. But Chile maybe running a bit out of steam after their early start and promise against Samoa and against the Japanese. I think maybe we're starting to see a little bit of fatigue from Los Condors. So Paul D, how's that looking now?
Yeah, well, I just want to say before we move off this screen, Samoa, I thought looked really good in that last maybe 15, 20 minutes of the second half. Argentina looked pretty dominant up until that point and looked like they had the game pretty well tied away, but Samoa scored late and were putting some fair bit of pressure on Argentina. So I was expecting Argentina to maybe have a bit more of a score in this game and have the scoreline maybe not so close. And as you said, Samoa could have got themselves a bonus point and they will be upset with themselves that weren't able to do that. But looking at the table so far, I've got England currently on first place on 14 points, getting all the wins in their games to date. Samoa in second place on 5 points, with Japan also in second place on 5, tied in second place currently on 5 points. They haven't played yet, so Samoa must have a better for and against at this point. Argentina in fourth on 4 points, and Chile on coming up the end with no points currently. So Argentina has 2 big games coming up to be able to, a big game. I think there's only one left. No, there'd be 2. 2 big games coming up. They've had their bye to make sure that they can qualify out of this pool.
100%. They'll need that bonus point against Chile, which you'd think they'd be banking on. And a huge game, really, for Japan. They've got 2 games, the Brave Blossoms, that could define this pool, really. You'd almost think that it's in Japan's hands. They're playing Samoa and they're playing Argentina. And there's a decent chance that if Japan get a good result in one of those games and a bonus point, maybe they're the ones that sneak through, which we wouldn't have predicted. I think after the first round of this World Cup that Japan might get a sniff and potentially a date with a Wales or a Fiji or who knows, Australia. Nah, but in a quarterfinal, it'd be
what
pretty
world are you
amazing
living in,
turnaround.
mate?
Pretty amazing turnaround for the Japanese if they can, after the kind of build up that they've had to make a quarterfinal. It's within their grasp, it's within their control, which is pretty interesting to see. So maybe Pool D is not so boring after all.
That's right. Lots of permutations still to come to see how that pool ends up finishing off. Still a lot of rugby to play in this World Cup. Now, as we said earlier in this podcast, Australia have all but got themselves out of this World Cup. So as podcast hosts, we can't just hang our hats up and say the World Cup's over. We need to pick a team to follow. Who are you backing now for the remainder of the Cup, Lockie, since the Wallabies don't look like they'll be hanging around too much longer?
Oh, you got to back Fiji, right? I mean, it's the fairy tale story of the World Cup, and I would love to see them make a quarterfinal, even if it's at our expense, which is hard to say. But Fiji potentially coming up against England, which is looking like a likely quarterfinal matchup now, given their recent history with the Fijians taking a game in Twickenham. I mean, there's so much to like about that matchup, and I think I've got to hang my hat on Fiji going ahead. Have you got a team in mind?
Yeah, I'm really hoping South Africa can go back to back. I think that'd be fantastic for their country. Obviously not getting the win this week, but as you said, they kind of lost that game and didn't win, and Ireland didn't necessarily win it with not getting their kicks. If South Africa can sort that out, and I don't know how they do that currently, but I'm sure they will get some more points off the tee, I think that they'll upset a few teams moving forward. So really excited by what they can bring later into this competition. And there is so much more rugby to look forward to. So don't give up hope yet, rugby fans back here in Australia. Now, this is getting to the end of the podcast. We've spoken a lot about the Wallabies. We've spoken a lot about Eddie Jones. We've spoken a lot about the Wales game. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on? Any sort of glimmer of hope that Wallabies fans can cling to for the remainder of 2023 and before we head into 2024?
Oh, maybe not so much the Wallabies. I mean, we've got the game against Portugal. I want a good win. I'll be up and watching again. It doesn't matter how many times we get hurt. We'll have the faith and come back. But there are some exciting things coming up in the rugby space. For the amateur game in particular, this coming week sees the Australian Rugby Shield return to Ballymore, which is some of our smaller states and regions playing, New South Wales and Queensland country, Tasmania, South Australia. A lot of these smaller areas get represented and play on the big stage, which you can watch through rugby.com.au, which is super exciting. And then also our Wallaroos. Our Wallaroos are back in action over these next few weeks as well. And we're seeing, the Laura O'Reilly Cup game happening, in this coming week. We're over against the Black Ferns and Waikato, I believe, this coming Saturday for a game. So lots to look forward to. We'll obviously be keeping touch of the World Cup and get our claws into WXV coming up. So there's plenty of rugby to look forward to. I think, the less said about that Wallabies game, the better. I think we've said all we can.
And for those that aren't aware and haven't seen the news, Rugby Australia has announced that they have what they're calling Super Rugby. Actually, I don't even know what it's called at this point. It's Super Rugby something or other, but it's an under 16s or under 19s competition that all of the state teams are playing in, and it's all broadcast live on Stan Sports. So you get a chance to follow your Super Rugby provinces and see some upcoming talent coming through the pathways as well, which is always a good opportunity. And that's something I think at this point that we can look forward to the future and hope that we might see some future Wallabies running around there.
Yeah, for sure. And with our 16s and 19s playing, we've also got our under 18s, I think, schoolboy Wallabies coming up. They've got 2 games against New Zealand in Canberra over the coming week. So we'll bring you some of that action too. And get behind our youth, get behind our Wallaroos, and stay behind the Wallabies. It's hard. It was really hard to come on this evening. I don't know about you, Mitch, but I found it quite difficult to sort of galvanise ourselves to come on and talk about it. But we still love them. I'll be up and watching that Portugal game, and we can have our post-mortem in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, looking forward to that. All right, let's call it there, team. Thanks for Ando for tuning in all the way from Bali. Hope you and the family enjoy your next coming week or so away. We'll be back next week to cover the Portugal game, and then maybe the week after, or we'll see how things are shaping up. We'll dive into the Wallabies and do a bit of a post-mortem of this World Cup and sort of figure out where and why it went wrong. Thanks to getting to this point in the podcast. We'll be back next week. We'll catch you then. Bye.